What would you do if a 9-year-old boy in duct-taped boots looked you dead in the eye and said he could heal your child, and something about the way he said it made you believe him? It was one of those biting winter mornings where the air feels thin and sharp, like the wind is made of glass. The sky hung heavy with clouds, but held back the snow, leaving the streets grey and cold. Outside the bustling Children's Medical Center on 7th Avenue, people moved quickly, bundled in thick scarves and heavy coats, clutching hot coffee cups like lifelines. Everyone was in a hurry to get in, get out, get away from whatever pain brought them to a place like that. But one figure didn't move. Just outside the entrance, right beside the revolving doors, sat a boy on a flattened cardboard box. His coat was too big, the sleeves rolled several times over, and a red beanie rested loosely on his head, almost slipping over his eyes. One boot was wrapped in silver duct tape, the other looked just as close to falling apart. He wasn't talking, wasn't begging, just quietly sketching into a battered notebook that looked like it had survived more winters than he had. People passed him like he was invisible, like he was just part of the sidewalk. Some glanced down, unsure whether to feel pity or guilt, but most simply kept walking, assuming someone that small had someone waiting for him inside, maybe a parent in treatment, maybe a sibling. He came almost every Saturday, sitting in that exact spot with the same quiet presence. At first, hospital staff tried to move him along, but when they saw he wasn't causing trouble, they stopped trying. The boy had a stillness to him, the kind that didn't demand attention but drew it all the same. When he wasn't sketching, he watched. Not in a way that made people uncomfortable, but with a kind of intense curiosity, like he was studying the world to understand it better. No one knew his name. No one asked. In a place where children fought invisible battles and parents walked with permanent worry etched into their faces, people learned to mind their own business. Across the street, the tinted windows of a dark grey Range Rover reflected the hospital's fluorescent lights. The engine hummed, idling. Inside, behind the wheel, sat a man who looked out of place, not because he didn't belong, but because he looked like he no longer knew where he belonged. His name was Jonathan Reeves, late 40s, sharp-featured with streaks of grey at his temples, the kind of man used to corner offices and catered lunches. His suit jacket was on the passenger seat. His tie was loose. His hands gripped the steering wheel like it was the only thing keeping him grounded. He had money. You could tell by the car, the Rolex on his wrist, the way even his exhaustion looked expensive. But none of that meant anything anymore. In the back seat, nestled into a booster with a soft pink blanket draped across her lap, sat his daughter Isla, 6 years old with a head full of chestnut curls and big, curious eyes that had grown too quiet too quickly. She didn't speak. She didn't fidget. She stared out the window at the clouds, unmoving. Her legs, once always in motion, climbing, kicking, dancing, now lay still beneath the blanket. It had been 5 months since the accident. One moment she was chasing her cousins through the backyard, the next she was paralyzed from the waist down, a passenger in her own body. Jonathan glanced at her in the mirror, then stepped out of the car and opened her door. He lifted her gently, carefully, like she was glass, as if anything too sudden might make it worse. Isla didn't resist. She never did. Her arms looped around his neck, her cheek resting on his shoulder, eyes still fixed on the sky. As they crossed the street toward the entrance, Jonathan didn't notice the boy on the cardboard. Most people didn't, but the boy noticed him. He watched the way Jonathan carried his daughter, the way her arms dangled, how her head tilted upward, always away from the hospital. He watched everything. And then, for the first time in weeks, he stood up. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't chase after them. He just said it. "Sir, I can make your daughter walk again." Jonathan froze, mid-step. Not because he was confused or offended or angry, but because the words didn't sound like a joke. They didn't even sound like a question. They sounded like a truth. Simple, unshakable. Like the boy believed it. And for a moment, Jonathan just stood there, tightening his grip on Isla, unsure if he'd actually heard what he thought he heard. He turned slowly. "What did you say?" The boy didn't flinch. He stepped forward, notebook tucked under one arm. "I can help her walk again." Jonathan stared, eyes narrowing. The boy couldn't have been older than 9. His coat was falling off his shoulders. One lens of his glasses was cracked and hung loose from the collar of his shirt. The duct tape on his boot was peeling. This had to be a scam, a kid's weird idea of a joke. He clenched his jaw. That's not funny. I wasn't joking, the boy said, voice steady, like a man twice his age. Jonathan looked around. No one else seemed to notice what was happening. The boy didn't beg, didn't smile, just stood there with that strange, stubborn stillness, like he wasn't trying to convince anyone, just letting them catch up to what he already knew. Jonathan shook his head and walked away. But as he stepped through the hospital doors, something followed him inside. A whisper, a possibility, a voice that wouldn't let go. Jonathan couldn't get the voice out of his head. He sat through the appointments, nodding as doctors used words he was already too familiar with. Spasticity, delayed response, retraining the nervous system. Words that sounded impressive, clinical, hopeful even, but they all led back to the same thing. No guarantees. He held Isla's hand through every explanation, every stretch, every routine evaluation. He listened as therapists described minor improvements, microscopic gains in muscle tone or nerve sensitivity, but nothing that could be called real change. Still, he nodded, said thank you, and helped his daughter back into her wheelchair like always. But every time the room went quiet, every time the doctor's voice faded into the background, that boy's words returned. Sir, I can make your daughter walk again. It wasn't the words themselves that haunted him. It was how they were said. No hesitation, no smile, no doubt. Just soft certainty, like the kid had looked into some invisible future and seen her running through a field already. Jonathan didn't believe in miracles, not anymore. He'd watched too many hopes crash and burn in sterile hospital rooms, heard too many empty promises wrapped in technical jargon. But something about that kid, it had been different. By the time they left the building, the sun had pushed through the clouds, but the air still held its bite. Jonathan carried Isla across the pavement, one arm under her knees, the other across her back. She leaned into him like she always did, quietly, her small hands resting against his chest. As they approached the car, he saw him again. Same spot, same posture, same box. The boy had returned to his drawing, but when he saw Jonathan, he looked up immediately, like he'd been expecting him. Jonathan paused. He didn't know why. Maybe because Isla's eyes were open again, watching. Maybe because he was tired of answers that led nowhere. Or maybe because deep down something had cracked open, and he wasn't ready to shut it just yet. He turned and crossed the street. You again, he said, walking toward the boy. Why would you say something like that? You think this is funny? The boy shook his head. No, sir. Jonathan set Isla gently in the back seat, covering her legs with the blanket before turning back around. You don't even know her. You don't know what she's been through. You don't know what we've been through. I don't have to know her, the boy said quietly. To help her. Jonathan folded his arms. You're what, 9? Almost 10? Exactly, the boy said. You're a kid sitting outside a hospital in the cold with tape on your shoes. What could you possibly know about helping someone like my daughter? The boy looked down, fingers running along the edge of his notebook. My mama used to help people walk again, he said softly. She was a physical therapist. She taught me stuff. Said the body remembers, even when the brain forgets for a while. Jonathan blinked, caught off guard. The boy wasn't lying. There was no bluff in his tone, no hunger for attention, just memory. So what? He said, trying to recover. You watched her stretch people out and now you think you're a doctor? I watched her help a man stand up after 5 years in a wheelchair, the boy replied, meeting Jonathan's gaze. She didn't have machines or assistants, just her hands, her patience, and her faith. Jonathan opened his mouth to say something, then stopped. A nurse pushing a cart passed them and gave the boy a small wave. A janitor nodded as he walked by, as if this kid were part of the staff. They knew him. That meant something. I'm not giving you money, Jonathan said firmly. I didn't ask for money, the boy replied. Then what do you want? The boy took a slow breath. Just 1 hour. Let me show you. Jonathan stared at him. There was no hustle here, no flash, just a tattered coat, an old notebook, and a strange kind of conviction that didn't belong in someone so young. He turned to look at Isla. Her eyes were open, her face turned toward the boy. She wasn't smiling, but she was curious, alert, present in a way she hadn't been for weeks. He sighed, rubbed the bridge of his nose. "I should walk away," he muttered. The boy didn't move. "I should call security." Still, no reaction. Jonathan exhaled slowly. "Fine. You want to waste your time, kid? Meet us at Harrington Park, tomorrow, noon. Don't be late." The boy nodded once. "I'll be there." Back in the SUV, Jonathan buckled Isla in without a word. As he pulled away from the curb, he caught one last glimpse in the rearview mirror. The boy hadn't moved, still standing there, arms at his sides, eyes watching the car disappear, like he was waiting for something bigger than all of them. That night, after dinner, Jonathan sat in his office. His desk was littered with files, contracts, business plans, reports he was supposed to read. But the words blurred on the page. All he could think about was that kid's face, that voice, that moment. A knock came at the door. Isla stood in the hallway, one hand on the frame. "Daddy?" He looked up. "Yeah, baby." "Who was that boy?" Jonathan hesitated. "Just someone we saw at the hospital." "He looked like he believed it," she said. "Believed what?" "That I could walk." He didn't respond right away. She walked her fingers along the armrest of her wheelchair like little legs. Then she gave him a look, not pleading, not desperate, just quietly hopeful. Jonathan wasn't smiling, not yet. But something had changed. Something dangerous. Something soft. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel numb. He felt something else, something terrifying and thrilling. He felt hope. Harrington Park wasn't much to look at. The grass was patchy, the swings squeaked when the wind picked up, and the old oak in the center had lost most of its leaves. The basketball court was cracked through the middle, the hoops rusted and netless. On most Sundays, it was a ghost town by noon. But that day, someone was already waiting. The boy, Zeke, sat on the same worn bench beneath the oak, a small gym bag at his feet, and a folded towel laid out beside him. He wore the same oversized jacket, with the sleeves rolled up, same knit beanie pulled low over his ears, but the notebook was gone. He wasn't drawing today. He sat upright, focused, scanning the street like he was waiting for something important. And he was. At 12:07, the dark Range Rover rolled into the lot. The engine cut off. No music, no words. The passenger door opened, then the back. Jonathan stepped out, reached in carefully, and lifted Isla into his arms. Her pink blanket trailed behind them as he wheeled her chair toward the bench. He didn't say anything. His face was neutral, unreadable. But he came. That said everything. Zeke stood when they approached. "Hi again," he said. Jonathan gave a slight nod. Isla waved shyly from her chair. "Hi, Isla," Zeke said gently. Her face brightened. "Hi." Jonathan raised an eyebrow. "How do you know her name?" "You said it yesterday," Zeke replied without hesitation. "I remember stuff." Jonathan glanced down at the towel, then at the bag. "So, what now? You going to pull out a magic wand or something?" Zeke didn't react to the sarcasm. "No, sir, just the basics." He crouched beside the bag and pulled out a few simple items. 2 pairs of clean socks, a tennis ball, a small jar of cocoa butter, and a plastic container wrapped in cloth. When he opened it, warm steam escaped. It was rice, packed tightly and still hot. Jonathan frowned. "What is all that?" "It's what my mum used," Zeke said, holding the rice. "The heat helps muscles relax. The ball is for pressure points. Everything else is to help her feel safe." He turned to Isla. "If it's okay, I'd like to start with your legs. I promise nothing will hurt. And if anything feels weird, just tell me to stop." Isla looked up at her dad. Jonathan sighed, hesitated for a moment, then gave a nod. You can try. Just be careful. Zeke knelt next to her and gently unwrapped the blanket from her legs. He pressed the warm cloth pack onto her thighs. She flinched. Too hot? She shook her head. It feels good. Zeke waited, not rushing, just letting the warmth sink in. Then, slowly, he began to move her legs. Small, circular motions. Nothing forced. He wasn't just handling her like a patient. He was treating her like a person, talking to her, asking about her favorite color, what kind of animals she liked, her favorite cartoons. At first, her answers were short, one-word replies, but slowly, she started asking questions too. Do you live here? Kind of, Zeke said. Do you go to school? I used to. Why not anymore? He paused. My mom got sick. Then she passed away. I've been figuring things out since. Isla looked down. I'm sorry. Thanks, Zeke said, still smiling gently. Jonathan, standing behind them with arms folded, had stopped looking skeptical. He wasn't relaxed yet, but he wasn't ready to leave either. After about 30 minutes, Zeke tapped gently on Isla's ankle. Can you feel that? She blinked. A little, like pressure. Zeke looked up. That's good. Jonathan leaned in slightly. She says that sometimes in therapy too. Feels something, but not much. Zeke nodded. Those rooms have machines and bright lights. They feel cold. Kids get scared sometimes and their bodies hold tension. Here, he gestured around. It's different. The air, the quiet, no pressure. It helps the brain listen better. Jonathan didn't respond, but he heard him. He was listening. Zeke helped Isla stretch again, then guided her toes in tiny flexing motions. Nothing dramatic happened. Her legs didn't jump, her feet didn't twitch, but she was calm, engaged, participating, and that was something. Zeke stood up, brushing his hands on his coat. We can try again next week, he said. It takes time, but your muscles still remember. They just need to be reminded. Isla smiled. Okay. Jonathan cleared his throat. We're not promising anything, he said quickly, voice tight. I'm not either, Zeke replied. I'm just trying. Jonathan watched him for a long moment. Then, without thinking, he reached into his coat and pulled out a folded $20 bill. He held it out. Zeke stepped back. No, sir, I don't want your money. Jonathan furrowed his brow. Then why are you doing this? Zeke shrugged, looking over at Isla. Because your daughter smiled. Jonathan followed his gaze. She was smiling. A small, real smile. The kind he hadn't seen in weeks, maybe months. And that, more than anything, shook something loose inside him. The next day, he found himself glancing at the clock around 11:45. He wasn't planning to go back, at least that's what he told himself. But at 11:50, he was already packing the bag. At 11:59, the Range Rover was pulling into the same cracked parking lot. Zeke was already there, towel laid out, bag beside him, same jacket, same worn boots. But something about him looked different, like he was lighter, like he knew Jonathan would come back. No words were exchanged at first. Jonathan simply lifted Isla into her chair. She was grinning before her feet even touched the grass. Hi, Zeke, she chirped. Hey, superstar, he said. Jonathan handed him something this time, a folded blanket. Thought it might help, he muttered. Zeke took it with a quiet, thank you. He spread it beside the towel, laid out the supplies and got to work. This time, Isla was more focused. Zeke asked her to press her heel into the ground. She tried. Nothing happened. He didn't react. It's okay, he said gently. Sometimes your brain just needs more time to find the path. It's like walking through a crowd. You've got to push through. Jonathan stood behind them, arms crossed again, but not defensive, just cold, listening. Why do you do this? He asked suddenly. Zeke didn't look up. Because I remember what it felt like when my mom helped people. She made them feel like they mattered. I want to do that too. Jonathan's gaze shifted to Isla. Her toes were moving, barely, but they were. She was tapping them. He didn't speak, just watched. The session ended like the last one. Quietly. No fanfare. But this time, Jonathan didn't need to be convinced to come back. He was already planning the next Sunday. It had become their new rhythm. Every Sunday, without fail, Jonathan and Isla would pull into the cracked parking lot of Harrington Park at precisely noon. The Range Rover, once a symbol of wealth and control, now carried something far more valuable in the back seat: a 6-year-old girl with growing strength in her legs, and a father who was slowly learning what it meant to hope again. Zeke was always there before them. He never showed up late, not once. Same spot, same setup. His bag lined with rice packs wrapped in cloth, the same cocoa butter jar, the worn-out tennis ball. His boots were still held together by tape, but his hands were steady, his voice calm, and every week Isla made just a little more progress. A toe that moved, a calf that twitched, a knee that lifted half an inch off the towel. And every time it happened, Zeke simply nodded like he expected it all along. He never celebrated too loud, never made a big deal out of it. He just let the victories speak for themselves. Isla looked forward to those Sundays with a kind of joy that had been missing since the accident. She started asking to wear her favorite headbands again, asked if she could help pack the bag. Jonathan watched the way she changed. She was still the same girl, but the light in her eyes was returning. Her posture in the chair was more upright. She laughed more, she talked more, and she stopped flinching every time someone mentioned the word walk. Zeke showed her new exercises each week. Rubber bands looped around her ankles to build strength, gentle tapping on pressure points behind the knees to wake up sleeping nerves. He even taught Jonathan how to press and release tension from the arches of her feet. Jonathan, who once sat stiff and guarded with crossed arms, now knelt beside them on the grass, helping Isla stretch, counting out seconds, holding the towel while Zeke worked. He still didn't talk much during the sessions, but the way he watched Zeke said enough. Respect had formed, unexpected, reluctant at first, but growing stronger with every Sunday. Then came the day everything cracked. It was their 4th weekend in the park. The air was warmer, the breeze gentle, the grass a little greener. Zeke was waiting like always, the towel spread out, water bottles lined up beside it. But when the SUV pulled in, something was off. The moment Jonathan stepped out, he slammed the car door harder than usual. His face was tight, his jaw clenched. He didn't make eye contact. Isla wasn't smiling. Her face was red, her eyes puffy, and when Jonathan unbuckled her and lifted her into the chair, she turned away from him, arms folded. "She doesn't want to do it today," Jonathan said sharply. Zeke looked at Isla. "What happened?" She didn't respond. She just stared at the ground, lips pressed into a hard line. Jonathan sighed. She tried to move her legs this morning. On her own. She couldn't. She got upset, threw her plate, locked herself in her room for an hour. She's frustrated. Honestly, we both are. Zeke nodded slowly and knelt beside her. "Isla," he said softly, "it's okay to be mad." She didn't look at him. "You think I don't get tired too?" he asked. "You think I didn't sit in a shelter and cry when my mum didn't have the money for her medicine? When I had to sit and watch her get worse?" Isla's eyes lifted slightly. "You're allowed to be mad," he said. "I get mad. I get scared. But if you stop now, if you stop trying, the part of you that still wants to walk might stop trying too." There was a long silence. Then she whispered, "I'm scared." Jonathan froze. That was the first time she'd said it. Out loud. Zeke's voice was barely above a whisper. "Me too. But being scared doesn't mean stop. It just means something big is coming." Isla's face crumpled. She wiped her eyes and finally looked up. "Okay, let's try again." And so they did. No talking, no jokes, just the 3 of them in the park, surrounded by wind and silence and distant birdsong. Zeke guided her gently through the motions. This time, Jonathan stayed close. He didn't hover. He participated, shifted her weight, repeated the stretches, whispered encouragement when she tensed up. Then, 30 minutes in, something shifted. Zeke tapped her ankle again. "Isla," he said quietly, Try to move your right foot. Just think about it." She took a breath, her brow furrowed. Then it moved. Not just a twitch, not just a toe. Her entire foot slid forward. It was stiff, it was slow, but it moved. Jonathan dropped to his knees beside her. "Do it again," he whispered. She did. Zeke didn't say anything. He just smiled and sat back, letting the moment belong to them. That night, Jonathan didn't sleep much. He sat on the back porch, a cup of coffee gone cold in his hands, staring up at the stars. Inside, Isla was telling the story to her aunt over speakerphone, about how her foot moved, how Zeke told her it would, and how she finally believed him. Her laughter echoed through the house like music. And for the first time in months, their home didn't feel like a hospital ward. It felt like life again. The next morning, Jonathan walked into the kitchen to find Zeke already awake, quietly pouring cereal into a chipped bowl. He was wearing the same jacket, hair flattened from sleep, eyes still heavy. Jonathan leaned against the counter. "Zeke," he said. The boy looked up. "Yeah? You ever think about staying here for a while?" Zeke blinked. "You serious?" "I've got a guest room," Jonathan said. "You wouldn't be in the way." Zeke looked down at his hands. "You sure your neighbors won't mind a kid like me?" Jonathan gave a short laugh. "After what you've done for my daughter, if they've got a problem, they can deal with me." The next morning, right on time, Zeke stood outside their door, a rolled blanket under one arm, a backpack over one shoulder. He didn't knock, he just stood there, waiting. Jonathan opened the door in sweatpants, coffee mug in hand. "Welcome home," he said. Isla came wheeling around the corner, her curls bouncing. "Zeke!" she squealed. "Hey, superstar," he said. And just like that, the boy who had nothing became part of a home. Word started to spread, though no one could say exactly how. It began quietly, like a rumor whispered between staff at the Children's Medical Center. A nurse, out walking her dog on a sleepy Sunday morning, had cut through Harrington Park to save time and saw something she hadn't expected: Isla. The same little girl she'd once seen being wheeled through the halls in silence, now sitting on a towel in the middle of a park, smiling. Her legs weren't dangling anymore. They were moving, subtle, shaky, deliberate, and beside her wasn't a specialist or a therapist or anyone in a white coat. It was a boy. No badge, no equipment, just a tattered jacket, taped up boots, and eyes focused on nothing but the child in front of him. The nurse didn't interrupt. She just watched, silently stunned, then turned and walked back home. By Tuesday, someone in patient services mentioned it during lunch. By Friday, a physical therapist had asked Jonathan during Isla's checkup, "Is it true? She's making progress, outside of her sessions?" Jonathan just nodded, unwilling to give the details, unsure if they'd believe him, even if he did. He could still hardly believe it himself. That Sunday, when they pulled into the parking lot, something had changed. Under the oak tree, not far from the usual towel and gym bag, stood two families. One had a young boy, maybe 7, leaning on a blue walker, his knees locked in a stiff, careful stance. The other had a teenage girl, thin and tired-looking, with a scar that peeked from behind her hairline. She sat in a transport chair and clutched a small stuffed rabbit. Her mother looked hopeful and desperate at once. Neither family approached Jonathan. They didn't have to. Their eyes followed Zeke. Jonathan looked at the boy and whispered, "You don't have to." Zeke adjusted the strap on his backpack. "I want to." He gave Isla a quick wave and then spent the next hour working with the two new children. He taught the boy's parents how to use the rice packs, how to hold his knees without causing strain. He showed the teenager how to move her toes with the help of her mother's hands. He didn't rush, didn't act like a teacher. He acted like someone who understood, like someone who'd been there, even if he never said how. Isla watched the entire thing without a trace of jealousy. She sat on her towel, hands folded, observing quietly. On the way home, she said, "I like watching him help people." Jonathan glanced at her through the mirror. "Yeah?" "Yeah," she said. "It makes me feel like I'm part of something good." Jonathan smiled to himself, a small one, but it lingered. The next weekend, 5 families showed up. The weekend after that, 11. Someone had printed flyers, basic black and white copies stapled to telephone poles and coffee shop bulletin boards. Free movement help, Sundays at noon, Harrington Park. No name, no credentials, but everyone knew who it was. A local pastor brought folding chairs. A nearby diner began dropping off coffee and bagels without being asked. A teenager with a Bluetooth speaker offered to play soft music in the background. Zeke never changed his routine, still laid the towel the same way, still unpacked the same worn bag, still used the same tennis ball. But now, before helping anyone else, he always checked in with Isla first. Asked how her legs felt, where the numbness was if she had tried walking in her dreams again. She always smiled and said, "Not yet." One day, a local reporter came by. She sat quietly, observing from a distance with a small notepad on her lap. She asked Jonathan for a comment. He shook his head, then pulled Zeke aside. "You okay with this?" Zeke looked around, at the parents kneeling in front of their children, at Isla laughing with another girl in a wheelchair, at the quiet determination that filled the air. "As long as it's not about me," he said. "It's about them." The story ran on page 2 of the Birmingham Sunday Post. 9-year-old with a gift helps dozens heal in a city park. They didn't print Zeke's full name. He'd asked them not to, but people found out anyway. A local pediatrician offered to mentor him. A non-profit asked if he needed equipment. A retired teacher volunteered free tutoring. For the first time since his mother had passed, people didn't just look at Zeke. They saw him, but he never let it get to his head. Still wore the same jacket, still showed up early, still said little. And every Sunday, without fail, he sat with Isla first. Then came the 9th Sunday. There was something different about the morning. The air was warmer, the breeze was softer, the trees swayed gently, almost as if they too were waiting for something. Isla was quiet during the drive, not sleepy, not nervous, just focused, like her body knew something her mouth hadn't said yet. They arrived to find the park already filling, more families than ever, folding chairs, thermoses, laughter in small waves. But as Jonathan wheeled Isla toward their usual spot, Zeke stood from the bench and gave her a look he hadn't given her before. Not a greeting, not a question, a challenge. "You ready?" he asked. She nodded. No smile, just that calm, serious look again. They laid out the towel. Isla sat down. Zeke knelt in front of her. "Same as before," he said. "We help you stand. You do the rest." Jonathan moved behind her, sliding his hands under her arms. Zeke guided her legs gently into place, adjusting her knees, pressing her heels down into the grass. "Okay," Zeke said softly. "On 3. Isla closed her eyes. 1, 2, 3 dot. Jonathan lifted. Zeke steadied her knees, and then she stood. Her legs trembled, her arms shook, but she stood, on her own 2 feet. No one moved. The park went silent. Someone gasped. A mother covered her mouth. Children froze mid-stretch. Isla opened her eyes and smiled. "I'm standing." Zeke blinked, but didn't speak. Jonathan was frozen in place. His hands let go. She didn't fall. "She's doing it," he whispered. "She's doing it." Isla took 1 step, then another. Then, because she was brave and 6 and didn't yet understand how extraordinary it all was, she took a 3rd step. She stumbled, but fell forward into her father's arms. He caught her, held her. His hands trembled. His eyes were wet. "You did it," he whispered. "You really did it." She looked over Jonathan's shoulder at Zeke. "You said I would." Zeke shook his head with a small smile. "I said we'd try." No one left the park quickly that day. They stayed. They hugged. Some prayed. Some cried. Zeke sat on the bench and just watched. He never said much. He didn't need to. That night, in a quiet kitchen with dishes drying in the sink, Jonathan leaned against the counter while Zeke poured cereal into a bowl. The boy looked smaller in a house, like a flame burning low but steady. "You know you changed everything," Jonathan said quietly. Zeke didn't look up. "I did. My daughter walked today," Jonathan said. Not because of a hospital. Not because of a miracle pill. Because of you. Because a kid with duct-taped boots kept showing up. Again and again. Even when no one asked him to. Zeke nodded slowly. That's what my mum would have done. Jonathan swallowed hard. I wish she could have seen this. Zeke finally looked up. She did, he said. I think she sees everything. Jonathan placed a hand on his shoulder. You're going to change a lot of lives, Zeke. Zeke nodded. I already am. And he was right, because some people are born with the ability to see what others can't, to reach through the noise, the fear, the impossibility, and touch something real. They don't wear capes. They don't ask for applause. They just show up again and again until someone stands.